So I got asked to just generally talk about what happens after this first release of 11X products. I don't want to take away from how awesome these products are. This is really, for me, sort of 6 years in the making, seeing this launch from when we started talking about what the next day was going to be and what problems we wanted to solve. So I don't want to take away from that. But at the same time, we, Qualcomm, we do also care about the roadmap. The amount of time that it takes to build these products, given the level of complexity now, it just doesn't happen in a year or two. So we have to plan out ahead. So at this point, I think we kind of know what the next 3 steps are. I'm going to talk about the next 2. I will field questions about the third one if you would like, and give you a feel for how we view the world today and then in the future. This is my, history of Wi-Fi on one slide, starting from 11B all the way until 2024, when we get to Wi-Fi 7. Now, between now and Wi-Fi 7, there are a couple of stops along the way. But about probably 2 years from now, we expect to see some new products that enter a new frequency band. The frequency band is in 6 gigahertz. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then, in terms of the number of features in the IEEE spec called 11AX, not all those features are showing up to market right away. So the industry actually will pack them in 2 packages. The first package is referred to as release 1, and then there'll be a follow-up release that has more 11AX features that will be coming to market in a few years, and I'll talk briefly about that. So 6 gigahertz. So if you're not familiar with 6 gigahertz, there's what's called an NPRM that's out right now. The FCC is considering opening up 6 gigahertz for unlicensed devices. And I'm going to tell a little story about how we got here to this point, and then give you an indication about how wonderful of an opportunity this is for Wi-Fi. So I'm an engineer, so I like to show predictive charts for marketing people that have done in the past to see how well these guys actually do predict the future. So this is a prediction by GSMA on the number of connected devices in a home done in 2015, so you can see how accurate they are. You can count your own home to decide whether this is the trend that you're seeing, but certainly the number of client devices attached to any one AP continues to grow dramatically. These are measurements that we made in 2015, looking at the density of access points. This is downtown San Francisco, if you don't know what Market Street looks like.
Yeah.
And this is a heat map of the number of APs that any one cell phone can see at a time. And you can actually see the streets of San Francisco measured in numbers of APs. Orange in this case is more than 50 APs seen by a phone at any one location. And this is in 2015, 2016 timeframe. So this was pretty scary data for us, 3-4 years ago. We knew that AX was going to bring a lot of new features that were addressing the problem of congestion. And that was the purpose of the 11AX spec, was not necessarily just to drive throughputs higher, but to develop features and bring to market features that were going to address the congestion problem. And when we looked at this, a bit of fear that I'm not sure 11AX alone is going to be able to deal with the level of congestion that we continue to see. I mean, the number of devices, the number of overlapping networks continues to almost outpace what we can invent. So this this combined with a conversation that I had with a regulator from Europe that will go unnamed, saying, you guys you haven't seen new spectrum in 15 years. The last new spectrum that was granted for unlicensed devices was the 5 gig spectrum. That was done quite some time ago. How come nobody's asking for more spectrum? And that dawned on me. I said, you know what? With this in mind, I wonder if we do need new spectrum, or whether 11AX alone will handle this problem. So that started us down a path of asking some questions like, what would it really take to deliver, let's say, gigabit networking in a home, everywhere in your home, like your bathroom, your closet, everywhere, not just near the access point, but could you actually cover, with a high probability, an entire home at a gigabit per second? It's something that some of our carrier partners were asking us. They want to sell gigabit service to your home. If a user walks around their home with speed test on their phone, they don't see gigabit everywhere, they might complain. That problem actually turned out to be pretty easy if you have a home out in the field. It turns out to be exceedingly hard if you have a home in a high-rise apartment complex. Because other people are using unlicensed spectrum, all the networks have to arrange themselves so they're not overlapping to the maximum extent possible. It turned out, from this study that Qualcomm published, which you can still, I think, get on our website, that there was not enough unlicensed spectrum to solve that kind of problem. And that launched us into a lot of conversations with other industry partners, had us starting to talk to regulators around the world about, is it time that we could potentially get some more spectrum for unlicensed. 700 megahertz was sort of the bogey. We said we thought we could solve some of these problems. For example, this gigabit networking everywhere, if we could find around 700 megahertz of more unlicensed spectrum in the mid-band, and that's an important point. You want your frequency to be in a sweet spot. If it's too low, if it's FM frequency, AM radio frequency, it travels too far, because then everyone has to share the same channel. But if it's extremely high, you get your reuse, your range shrinks, and there can be advantages to very high frequency. But in the case of these Wi-Fi use cases, it's really that mid-band that's a sweet spot between 3 and 8 gigahertz. And so after quite some level of discussion and a lot of teamwork around the industry, not just from people with Qualcomm, but people at our, a lot of our competitors and also our customers, we've worked together to get the process to the point now where last year the FCC released what's called an NPRM, it's a notice of proposed rulemaking, where they say we're thinking about allowing 1.2 gigahertz of spectrum between 5.9 and 7.1 gigahertz to be allocated for unlicensed use. They went through and asked a bunch of questions of industry, and then also specified some proposed rules, which may or may likely will change in some way before the rules are actually done. They proposed both a high and a low power version of access points, and then depending on whether you're high or low power, you would get access to different parts of the spectrum. Stations would be essentially linked to their AP, so that stations would be allowed in the band as long as they could be authorized by an appropriate access point. You would be sharing the spectrum. Okay? So this is very juicy real estate. There are people living there. Satellite uplink, which we have a very easy time sharing spectrum with. More challenging incumbent there are these really large dish point-to-point links that are used for backhaul for various uses. I'll show you a plot of what that looks like. So there's incumbents now, so it's important for us to be able to convince ourselves that we can protect these incumbents. And Wi-Fi has a history of being able to share spectrum with other users. Both in the 2.4 band, we share with lots of other unlicensed devices, cordless phones, Bluetooth, Zigbee. In 5 gig, we actually share that spectrum with military radar around the world. So as an industry, we're used to dealing with sharing spectrum, and it'll be up to us to convince ourselves and the rest of the world that we can protect these incumbents. Also, Europe now is considering opening up similar spectrum so that we'll have at least overlapping spectrum between the US and Europe, though they're looking at around only 500 megahertz of spectrum, 5.9 to 6.4. If you're not excited about 6 gigahertz and you're not sensing that I'm excited about, let me just sort of put this on a chart so that you can see the magnitude of impact that this will have on our future. Spectrum is the lifeblood of all wireless systems. Right? Networks have to work on channels that are provided by the allocation of the spectrum. So what I've shown here is the comparison of the number of channels that we have, that we grew up on, the Wi-Fi ecosystem grew up on, the 2.4 band. There's those measly 320 megahertz channels that you see on the left side. And for a long time, that's all we used. Then during the 11AC days, we actually wrote that standard to get people into the 5 gig band. 28 megahertz was mandatory, 5 gig was mandatory. We dragged the industry into the 5 gig band. You can see there's sort of two chunks of it. There's 160 megahertz in the low end, and then more channels in the upper end. And we share most of that. This is DFS required. We share most of that with military radar. And that's what we've lived on. And like I said, when we did our spectrum needs study, we said, let's throw the book at this. Let's use all those channels. Let's use all the techniques that we have, AX, mesh. Let's use everything that's been invented up to this point. Is it going to be enough spectrum? And we said, no, we needed 700. And the FCC went out and gave us 1,200. Well, they haven't given it to us yet, but they proposed to give us to 1,200. And just look at, just look at the magnitude of the number of channels, and you think, if we have a congestion problem in the future, we're gonna be living across 3 bands, and we essentially, assuming that everything goes well, unlicensed devices, including Wi-Fi, will essentially get a tripling of the allowed spectrum, and that's going to have some immediate impacts on the way users experience Wi-Fi. So in the home, like I said, I'm excited about delivering gigabit everywhere in your house, every little corner, every little nook and cranny. A mesh system in your home likely will be a 10 gig backbone. So the connections between mesh devices will move to 10G, and you'll be at the point where wireless is faster than wired. In an enterprise, so Cisco released a really interesting study as part of an IEEE contribution, where they went and looked and mined all the data that they had from their controllers, the wireless controllers that they have in enterprises around the world. And what the wireless controllers end up doing is, their intelligence is arranging channels, arranging